Hey everybody, today we are going to talk about The Fall Is All There Is by C.M. Caplan. It is the first book in the Four of Mercy series. It is 413 pages long and came out in November of 2022. It is a finalist for SPFBO 9. This is the first book in my SPFBO finalist series. I hope to do all 10 of them. Back before I took my break, when I was just in podcast format every year, I tried to do all of the SPFBO finalists. One note with this SPFBO series, as I'm going to call it, is that normally when I do a book, I almost always only do books that I enjoy and that I don't know if I'm going to call it a tacit recommendation, but a book that I think that a large portion of my audience might like. I'm not saying anything about this one, whether I do or don't like it, but when I do these SPFBO finalists, it is the only time that potentially I'll have books that will be rated below, like say a 7. I know that's a little bit different and maybe even kind of a jerk move on my part sometimes if the only time I might do a book and rate it low and actually put out an episode on it is for a SPFBO finalist. But it's a competition. I know that I am not a judge. But the SPFBO competition is absolutely the reason why I got into indie books. I really enjoy it, and I kind of just like having something that I do every year. Gives me 10 books that I wouldn't necessarily choose on my own, and because of that, I'm going to have 10 books that are completely new to me, potentially with authors that I've never heard of before. And at this point, some of my absolute favorite authors are, were SPFBO finalists or SPFBO winners. I think that's enough of that. I've rambled on long enough to start things off. Let's go ahead and talk about The Fall Is All There Is by C.M. Caplan. I will read the book blurb, and then we'll get into the characters, the plot, the good, the bad, and my thoughts. All Peter Mercy wanted was a good old-fashioned dramatic exit from his life as a prince. But it's been 5 years since he fled home on a cyborg horse. Now the king, his dad, is dead, and Peter has to decide which heir to pledge his thyroid-powered sword to. As the youngest in a set of quadruplets, he's all too aware that the line of succession is murky. His siblings are on the precipice of power grabs, and each of them want him to pick their side. If Peter has any hope of preventing civil war, he'll have to avoid one sibling who wants to take him hostage, win back another's trust after years of rivalry and resentment, and get an audience with a sister he's been avoiding for 5 years. Before he knows it, he's plunged himself into a web of intrigue in a world of strange, unnatural inventions just to get to her doorstep. Family reunions can be a special form of torture. If you heard the words cyborg horse and thyroid-powered sword, I think that gives you a little bit of an introduction to what this world is going to be like. The book, I think I actually forgot to say in the beginning, is classified as a Post Apocalyptic Future Sci-Fi Fantasy. That's quite the mouthful. But basically, here's how the world ended up the way it is, which is basically a fever dream or acid trip is the best way to describe it. We had the first annihilation happened sometime in the distant past. People were in a modern world. I don't know if it's Earth. It doesn't really matter what it was. And they enabled magic to come into the world. That created all kinds of chaos. A good example of that is that 2 of the main castles described in the book, one is in the around the petrified skeleton of a giant mastodon. Think like the tusks and everything. That's actually the house crest of the Mercies. That's the quadruplets that we'll be talking about with Peter as our single point of view character. And another one is in what was either a giant lizard or maybe a dragon, the bones of it. So that first annihilation created magic. The second annihilation apparently ended magic officially, but did leave us with an awful lot of like crazy tech. It also left with there's at one point they were going through a forest of like concrete trees that have jewels for leaves and things like that. I mean, we're talking like a real crazy weird world in this one. I've heard the term weird Western in the past, and there is a little bit of that. They are using guns, but they're kind of weird guns. They're also kind of like a mix of technology and like that cyborg tech. I think that they have like a vocal box as their triggering mechanism. His cyborg horse is a mix of technology and like flesh that they grow. It appears in like the ground, and they'll pull it up and cut off the necessary parts. His sword, it mentions, is a thyroid-powered sword, so he'll actually activate it, and then it basically can cut through anything but another one of those swords. So definitely dealing with a ton of like crazy, weird technology. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but that's the world. We're definitely dealing with some weird stuff. I think the one big thing that is important, like just to note specifically with that, is that ghosts are very real, and they'll like try to get into your body if you aren't wearing like a mask, basically like a gas mask. I kind of thought Fallout, because that was the original book cover, and if the ghost gets into you and takes you over, you can't get rid of it without being killed, and those ghosts want to kill you. So getting into the important characters, we only have one point of view character, as I've mentioned, Peter. He is the youngest of the quadruplets that are discussed. He has autism. He's bisexual. Both of those come into play in the story. His autism, has made him prone to not be great in social conditions. Doesn't make for a great prince necessarily in the past. He has a mom who tried to overthrow his father in a coup. She was thwarted in that attempt, but instead of being killed herself for that coup attempt, because she's like a really good scientist, and it helps bring back that old technology that it still exists, and it's called corpse technology. At first I had a little bit of trouble like quite figuring out what that corpse technology is, especially when they're talking about like cyborg horses and stuff, but basically just old technology that is from the before the second annihilation time. His mom has done a lot of things to try to make Peter more normal, if you will. He gets these injections that make him a good fighter, so he's not clumsy and uncoordinated. He has 3 siblings. The oldest is Annalise. She's kind of like a clone of her mom, very smart, very short. It's mentioned multiple times. And she's supposed to become the queen when the father dies. The second son is Edgar. He was kind of trained as like Annalise's understudy, if you will, and he's the one that's trying to kidnap Peter and have a civil war and actually take over and become king himself. Then there's a third son. He plays a bigger role later in the story. His name is Desmond, and he's been trained since he was a child to be a diplomat. So he's the one that they would send out to talk to the other nobles. We are dealing with like a feudal society at this point now. So the 4 quadruplets, they all have a very strained relationship due to their very weird parents and the relationship with their parents. And Peter had left, 5 years prior to the story starting, and gone off on his own and was like at one of their big vassals places, and kind of, had definitely done some maturing and grown up a little bit during that time. So a lot of his interactions with his siblings are going to be based off of what they remember him before he left at 18. So they're all 23 now at this time when the father has died. And as I mentioned, the plot itself is that Edgar, that second of the quadruplets, he has decided that he is going to try to overthrow his sister Annalise. At the beginning of the story, he basically kidnaps Peter. Peter doesn't know he's being kidnapped. He thinks that Edgar is still taking him to go see his sister so that he can pledge fealty to her. And then the rest of the story unfolds from there. Peter is a funny character. I think that he's done pretty well. I have a couple of nephews who have autism, and a cousin, and that are like high functioning, and I definitely feel like getting like fixated on one thing is a thing that was done really well and talked about. And like it's funny because a lot of Peter's weird interactions are because he'll latch onto like one thing that's said that's kind of minor, and then he'll get sidetracked from the main storyline. I mentioned earlier that he's bisexual. There will be sexual encounters with both males and females in the story. A little bit graphic. They're pretty short scenes, but they are descriptive. So that's an important thing to mention, that there is sex in the book. There's plenty of violence too. Some of it a little bit graphic. But once again, those scenes are shorter as well. There's not a lot of there's no torture or anything like that. Those people that can get infected by ghosts are called gaunts. They come into play an awful lot. The one thing I kind of actually did, it's funny because I don't feel like they feel overly bad about when they have to kill the gaunts. It's kind of like one of those things where well, you don't recover from being a gaunt. So it's like a mercy to kill them. So as I mentioned with the plot, it's basically the whole thing is dealing with Peter as he first gets kidnapped, then goes to his sister, and then the fallout between all of that and what's going to happen as the story unfolds. Getting into the bad, the good, and then my own reactions. So the bad. Let's start off with that this story's weird. And that can be both a positive. If you're reading this story, I think that the probably the closest analog to this book would actually be Mark Lawrence, the founder of SPFBO, and his Broken Empire trilogy, where there's a lot of weird things. There's a lot of magic, or there's trolls, ogres, things like that, right? Things that happened when humanity tapped into magic and did things that they shouldn't have done. But whereas the weirdness in Broken Empire is say a 7 out of 10, this is a 13 out of 10, right? Sometimes I felt the weirdness of this, that Caplan was just being weird to be weird at times, and it took away from what was otherwise sometimes a little bit of a touching story even. When Peter and his siblings, they'll fight over something, a lot of times because those siblings did something to take advantage of Peter, or they didn't tell him something because they thought he was going to get upset and throw a fit like he would have as a teenager. And as they're dealing with those things, it's fun, but then there'll be just ridiculous things interspersed, right? At one point he's talking to his brother Desmond in what I thought was a pretty touching scene. And then he looks over and mentions that there were pug guard dogs with bionic eyes. And it's that's kind of weird, right? Why did it need to be pugs? And that definitely took me out of that scene when, the sheer ridiculousness of it. If it had been toned down to that 7, maybe even if it had been toned down to an 8 or a 9, instead of being a 13 out of 10, I definitely would have enjoyed the story more because, as I have mentioned multiple times in these videos, and it has been mentioned in almost all of my 90 or so previous podcast episodes, that I can get fixated on things and let that pull me out of the story. And some of those real absurd details definitely pulled me out of that movie in my mind. And then this is kind of still playing off of that ridiculousness thing. I kind of had a hard time even just imagining the scenes in the storyline sometimes. A lot of times when they're describing the countryside, it really helps make the world real to me. But sometimes it was so weird, that concrete, the concrete forest with, jewels for leaves of a, I just have a hard time thinking of the characters in that, right? So I really had a hard time imagining the world at times and staying in that movie in my mind. Getting into the good, I really felt like Peter was a great character. The autism was handled very well. I don't think it was ever exploitative, and I feel like it was fun seeing the way that he interacted with his siblings. I have a sibling of my own that I have not always gotten along with in the past, and I felt like it really did work. I think in Caplan's bio it says he's a quadruplet, so I'm sure that he was able to play off of that a little bit. In some ways, I guess this kind of is a little bit autobiographical, but in a fantasy setting, while being, real absurd. So the character interactions was really good. I liked some of the secondary characters, especially Edgar. He's definitely the antagonist of the book, and he kind of is an asshole. I think that it was fun being in the mind of a different character than what you're used to for a an MC in a fantasy. We're not dealing with, like someone who is a crazy awesome swordsman, or who's got magic, or who is the chosen one, right? He is definitely not the chosen one. He is the pawn in the story. Another really good element is that the story is very entertaining. There's basically nonstop action. For being a story that, has a lot of description and a lot of talking about, weird things, it definitely doesn't like go off for like 20 pages describing the weird world. It's all brought up while it is being integrated into, like, say, fight scenes or something, right? Right, at one point they're running from a whole bunch of the Gaunts, and they're going through this jungle on their cyborg horse who's getting tired, right? And it's important and like to the plot. So everything is really integrated very well. The book is kind of wordy to start off with, almost like that first chapter is just to show that you can't, that he was capable of it. But once you get past like that first chapter, the first the intro part of it, I felt like the way the writing was really flowed, and I felt like the character interaction is done really well. On to my own personal thoughts and my rating of the book. As I've mentioned, the book, sometimes the absurdity got in its own way of what was otherwise a very entertaining story. I feel like the story really flows when it's not getting in its own way. I think that if you like weird westerns, or you're looking for a post-apocalyptic weird sci-fi story, that like this would be a book for you. Like I said, it's definitely different from Mark Lawrence's. It's not nearly as dark. I know that like the world would have to be classified as grimdark, but I don't think that this is really a grimdark book. There's a lot of weird, crazy elements for sure, and it certainly isn't a world that most people are going to enjoy living in. But it doesn't have that same dark tone. I didn't feel like that, like say the Broken Empire trilogy did. If you want an unusual character, or you want like a different, someone who's autistic, then I think that's done very well. Like I kind of enjoyed, when he would ramble off, or he would go and think about these one things while someone else is talking to him, and then he can't remember exactly what else they were actually talking about. And then, the ones who know him will be like, oh, darn it, you got sidetracked again, didn't you? And he'll respond with, well, you know that I do. Why would you bring that weird thing up, right? And so if you like characters like that, then this is a good book for you. I'm going to rate this a 7 out of 10. I feel pretty good about that rating. I gave it a 3-star on Goodreads and Amazon. I know that's more of like a 6 out of 10. But I definitely think that for me, a 7 is where it's at. But I would need a little bit more solid to be that 4-star on Goodreads, which is more like the 8 out of 10, right? So if we're splitting the difference, I'm going to go down instead of up. And that's mostly because, like I said, I felt like sometimes just the book was absurd just to be absurd. And it got in the way of what was otherwise a really good story, something that was unique and different. For me, wanting to interact with the SPFBO competition is because I want these different books, right? If I want your standard, typical sword and board with the chosen one hero, then you can go to the Big Five and you're going to find hundreds or thousands of series like that. And so this book is one of those books that I think that the SPFBO competition highlighting is an enjoyment for me. But I think that at times it was just too weird for me to give it that that 4 or 5 star. So once again, this is a very adult book. There are definitely sex scenes, a little bit graphic at times. There is violence. I think there's a lot of cussing. So absolutely not a children's book. It is an adult book. But like I said, if you want a different MC than your standard traditional, or you like that weird and absurd, then this would probably be the book for you. After this book, I'm currently reading the Wickwire Watch. That will be my next video. I'll be finished with that hopefully today or tomorrow, and then I'll get it recorded this weekend, and we'll get right on to the SPFBO 9 series. Thank you, everybody.